Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and I'm joined again with David Kirkpatrick and Daniel Burge of the Kentucky Historical Society, and we're going to continue talking about Zachary Taylor, one of Kentucky's forgotten presidents. So, as we said, Taylor defeats General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, right? Catapults him to well, I mean, but oh, side note, Ulysses S. Grant served under Taylor during this whole conflict. So another nice little connection to presidents, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
He during this little time from, say, the end of the Mexican-American War to the time he does enter into the political ring as a presidential candidate, his wealth increases. He has multiple plantations, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Louisville. On the the darker side of history, he's enslaved. He has hundreds of people enslaved and so forth, keeping the property. I don't know an exact number. Do you know a number by chance? Or
I never got a number. I know his son eventually, Richard Taylor, eventually takes over his Louisiana plantation because he eventually gets sort of invested in sugar, and his son goes down there. I know they had as many as 200 enslaved people by the Civil War.
Yeah,
at that plantation because it became quite large. I don't know in the terms of Louisville and Mississippi as well what size we're looking at, but he was a significant slaveholder in terms of it's one of the reasons, if you look at why he puts like Fillmore on the ticket in 48 alongside him, they had to sort of balance it sectionally. Yeah. So they got the New Yorker with the guy, typically Taylor, depending on how they looked at it, they would portray him as being from Louisiana, or like as a Louisianan, just because that's where his major plantation or one of his main plantations was. So it'd be like Zachary Taylor of Louisiana, Millard Fillmore of New York, and they sort of offset each other.
And get the big electoral college votes from those.
It's always funny though when you look at the electoral college from back in the day, how like different states are not what you'd expect. When you see like Texas and it's like 1, you're just like, but Florida's like, it's just like 2 votes. You're like, wow, Florida.
Kentucky with its probably I don't know, maybe I don't know what it'd be though. 6 or 7 votes is a powerhouse. Oh, 12? 12?
Something like that, yeah. And the funny thing though, one of the reasons I ended up, I came to the Kentucky Historical Society to actually look at some of Zachary Taylor's letters that are at the Historical Society, because they were scattered later. A lot of them didn't survive because his plantation ends up getting burned. His family's sort of plantation in Louisiana gets burned during the Civil War. So you lose a large amount of materials relating to Taylor. But yeah, like there's just interesting connections. In Kentucky, he's very sort of astute. It's actually Crittenden who plays a really big role in sort of going, hey, I think this Taylor guy is pretty good. So Crittenden really plays a large role in making sure Henry Clay stays like we're not running you again, Henry. Lost. Just settle down there. But there is a lot of that. Like I think they sort of see him as a middle of the road Crittenden very early on. I think Kentucky plays a much larger role in some of that. And I think Taylor's also he's a much better politician than people give him credit for. The letters I was looking at, I was just impressed by. He knows the right people. He just happens to come back to Kentucky a couple of times, during sort of the campaigns. So you'll see like him pop into Frankfurt. Like you'll see little things like that where I think he's astute. Like he kind of knows, yeah.
And Kentucky plays a bigger role during this time than obviously it probably does now. But it's a bigger player. You want that support from Clay and those people in Kentucky to get those votes. I mean, you got to get the electoral college votes.
And it's tricky because I think Crittenden sort of has that. Crittenden has the worst handwriting in the world. I went to see his papers once. It's terrible. It's horrible to read. But I think he and Henry Clay sort of have a bit of I don't say a break, but there's sort of that, how could you support this other guy? But I think Crittenden recognizes like Henry Clay's not super popular in the North. Like he's just not great at winning the key states that you need, like New York and Pennsylvania. Whereas Taylor, just because of his military victories, like he plays well in the South because he does have slaves, so no one really suspects him of like, oh, he's an abolitionist or something. But also in the North, like he's a military hero, so he's he wins New York, he wins he wins the key states.
Yeah,
and that's half of being a politician. I mean, you gotta, they had swing states then too, and you had to win those. And Henry Clay just was not. He just couldn't get the right combination of states.
Yeah, and he tried to balance it. I think probably a little too much to say, I have slaves, but I'm against it. I need the North votes, please vote. And the South, and don't worry, I won't do anything. It may and that might play though to people as well that you're not going to be able to sell. To sell out both sides to get that,
because it's a tough situation. I mean, Taylor he gets dinged in the North a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Northerners who, especially New York, sort of New England area, who will say, we're not supporting a guy who has massive plantations, like, and they kind of buck that.
Yeah.
So you sort of see. I mean, that's what hurts Henry Clay as well. I mean, in 44, he loses a lot of votes because a lot of people are like, they don't like James K. Polk, but they also don't really like Henry Clay. So like a lot of northern states kind of feel like, oh, we're kind of out of this. So
yeah.
There's a lot of discontentment in both parties at the time, which is one of the things I think that helps him, is because you've got the free soil movement in the North that shatters a lot of the opposition up there. So yeah, it's a tough time to coalesce around anybody.
Yeah, because I think people, I mean, to that point, Martin Van Buren basically splits off. I mean, and that's a huge blow to the Democratic Party. I mean, one of the people, I mean, it's like Jackson and Van Buren. It's your tag team, like the two, most significant people. And one of them is like, free soil, maybe. and so like that does, I mean, especially in New York, that really messes up the Democrats.
Yeah. And just to catch everybody up here again, so Taylor, with his newly found popularity, he throws his name into the political ring. He's nominated for the Whig Party in 1848. He does fairly well. His opponent, like you said, it was Martin Van Buren, which was a free soil party. You got Lewis Case, who was the Democratic Party candidate. Taylor becomes the 12th president. He won 163 of the 290 electoral college votes. Trying to do math right in my head, but that's a pretty good little haul. I mean, it wasn't exactly a complete landslide. I wouldn't call it that, but he got 47% of the vote. Case got 42% of the vote. So, not a landslide. Well, actually, I think in the popular vote, it probably would be a landslide, because don't they consider a landslide like more than 3%? Or am I completely wrong with that, or I have no idea?
No, I don't know. He does. I mean, if you look at how the Whigs did, though, and of course, the next cycle they do terrible. So I think, like, all things considered, like,
So it's a win.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win. That's pretty hard to do.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean,
Especially if they've lost so many.
they just, I don't know. They had such bad luck. It's like every time they win one, they just
Yeah, it does not go well for them, even if they
it's
won.
terrible.
But Kentucky connection as well. You talked about Crittenden. He offers the Secretary of State position to Crittenden, but Crittenden declines and serves as Kentucky's governor. Again, though, maybe that was Crittenden making that connection, but then sticking around for Kentucky. You can't fault him on that. You can't.
Well, one of the things that they do in this time period, and it's a little bit different than today, if you were worried about winning a state, this sounds kind of weird, but if you were worried about winning a state, you'd have a governor, like a popular individual, run for governor, because the idea was that you'd have like the coattail effect. You know how, like, if you vote for a certain Republican president, people think, oh, you'll vote for, the Republican person from the House
or whatever. Yeah.
So it was kind of the reverse of that. So they actually convinced Crittenden to run for governor because they think if someone as popular as Crittenden is your governor, then that's going to sort of help carry the state for the Whigs. Which I don't know if they had to be that worried about it. I mean, Kentucky, I think it votes for the Whigs like every time.
It's
pretty consistent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they do sort of have that coordinated strategy. Yeah, it's weird because they actually pick a vice president who's pretty good. I mean, when you think of U.S. history, you think of like William Henry Harrison and John Tyler, who hate each other, and like Tyler just blows up his entire presidency. You get Andrew Johnson and Abraham Lincoln. So if you're thinking about that, like the actual Taylor and Fillmore actually kind of get along. Like Fillmore doesn't really try to like undo everything that Taylor did, or it's actually a pretty decent selection.
Yeah. And back on the Whig thing, Kentucky did elect like 5 or 6 Whig governors, like straight.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lot. Which, I mean, Henry Clay kind of ran the show when the Whigs dominated.
Would have been some ballot box stuffing going on.
That comes in 1850, I think.
Down the road, we get a little bit of
that. So Taylor's the president. The biggest issue is all the land acquired from the Mexican-American War, which it's again, Taylor kind of had a big hand in this, technically helping win the war and so forth. But you had the expansion of slavery, the non-expansion of slavery. Taylor had slaves, but didn't necessarily support the expansion of slavery. Then you also have California's exploding. Population is exploding, not literally. The gold rush, all that stuff is going on. And then, not too long after that,
he's dead.
He dies. Is it the shortest president? It's not the shortest presidency, is it?
William Henry Harrison, yeah.
Okay.
Harrison dies in like
36 days.
Another Whig. So again, I always tell people, like, it's really unfortunate because if you think about it, like, William Henry Harrison wins, he dies. Zachary Taylor wins, dies. The only other guy who is like a Whig, I mean, he becomes a Republican, is Abraham Lincoln. So I mean,
oh gosh, yeah. Now that you point that out,
well, there, if you think about it, I mean, that's like, you know what I mean?
There's a thesis in that somewhere. I never thought about that. Right?
Because the Democrats aren't like, it's not happening to them. Whatever, you know what I mean? Andrew Jackson gets to serve his 2 terms. He's getting shot at. Stuff's happening. You can't kill Andrew Jackson. And then William Henry Harrison gives a speech and he's dead. So it's like,
maybe. I was gonna say maybe Clay lucked out.
Yeah, Taylor is sort of. His presidency is interesting because I do think you can see sort of his Kentucky roots in what he tries to do. he's really a moderate in terms of his approach to slavery, in the sense of his idea for he doesn't really believe in a compromise of 1850. Like, he thinks you should just have California come in as a free state, New Mexico as a territory, but as a free territory. He doesn't see any reason why those have to be slave states or slave territories. He doesn't think you have to sort of like split it between North and South. In his view, if California votes and decides that, hey, we're going to have a free territory, free state, they can do that. And he sees no problem with that. He really doesn't think slavery has to expand. So even though he does, I mean, he defends the institution of slavery. He's not like abolitionist or anything by any stretch of the imagination. He doesn't really think slavery has to expand that much. So he's definitely opposed to a lot of people in that. So I think it's a good reminder that even in the South, how people viewed the institution of slavery was different. Because you do have, like, Jefferson Davis is very gung-ho on, we need Cuba. There has to be that expansion of the institution or it'll sort of die. Taylor never sees it that way. Like, if you just leave it alone, he sort of thinks it'll either go away or else it shouldn't be the main political issue. So that causes him a lot of trouble because Henry Clay's still alive. He doesn't like that plan. And so Henry Clay sort of has his own compromise. And then Taylor's like, no. So I think if you're talking about the greatest what if, I think it's like, what would have happened if Taylor had lived? Because he didn't really want to compromise that much. He just thought you just brought him in as free states and that's the end of the story. Where Clay worked out, the whole elaborate, California is a free state. You get a fugitive slave law. You get New Mexico's like a territory. Like, you have all these nuanced parts that's supposed to make everyone happy, but then everyone just gets angry about it.
You mentioned Taylor's Kentucky roots. Is it fair to say that in wanting California to come in as a free state, you're getting some of that discussion out of Washington and away from a place he distrusts and dislikes anyway? Because even after he wins the election, he stays out of Washington as long as he possibly can before he actually forms his cabinet and takes the office. So is this an effort to keep power in the hands of the states as opposed to the people? I mean, as opposed to the capital?
I think some of it. I think part of it is he still believes, I think he's Whig enough where he still sees a benefit of a strong government. So I think the one thing that's really interesting with Taylor, and another kind of interesting what if, he's a really strong nationalist. During the Civil War, his son, Richard Taylor, he sort of works his way up the ranks of the Confederate Army. I think he becomes a general by the end of it. I mean, he's pretty well connected and well placed, but Taylor himself, I mean, I think if anyone would have bucked him, he'd have pulled like an Andrew Jackson of like, you don't have a right to do any of that. So I do think it's kind of like he wants California to decide. I think part of it is he lives in Louisiana. I just don't think he thinks slavery can thrive out west. So he sees that as sort of a moot point. Like, you're not going to get slavery in New Mexico or California. So why are you going to fight over that? And I think, it's the biggest what if ever. It's like, what would have happened if, he doesn't die, if he really just hunkers down and says, this is what I want, I'm president. Is that the legislation that gets passed, or does a compromise come about anyway? Because what does happen is Fillmore takes over and Fillmore is open to sort of the compromise.
Yeah.
So he ends up, it gets broken up into smaller parts. It's sort of, it's maneuvered through by Stephen Douglas. It's sort of a complicated process, but Fillmore is like open to that, where I don't know what would have happened if you had Taylor there, who's very open. I'm not going to sign off on sort of the compromise. I think it was Holman Hamilton, did a book on the compromise of 1850. And he said that it's sort of a shame that Zachary Taylor dies because it had been a really good sort of litmus test for, national authority. What happens if people try to revolt, or if there's sort of a break, having someone like him at the helm who was a soldier and who was very, I mean, it's like Andrew Jackson when nullification comes up, that, you know, you can't do this, so don't try it. And if you try it, I'm coming down there. Like,
Well,
there is that. I think that's the idea. Like, what if Taylor was that dude? I don't know.
Well, you know, when Southern some Southern leaders did threaten some secession, Taylor did say that he would lead the army down himself and hang all rebels.
But that's what's crazy. That's what's kind of crazy to think about. Is like, okay, what happens in that case? Or just, I always think, like, what happens? The Whig Party ends up. Fillmore signs off on the Compromise of 1850, like the individual bills. He gets both wings of the party mad at him. It's actually Southerners who are like, we like Fillmore. So the Southern wing of the party actually approves of Fillmore, even though he's from New York. The Northern wing of the Whig Party doesn't like Fillmore because they feel like he sort of gave things up by passing the Fugitive Slave Act, and that he had sort of catered to Southerners. So he ends up getting dropped from the ticket. They run Winfield Scott. That's just a disaster. I mean, that's a terrible campaign. And the Whig Party sort of goes away. So I don't know, like, if Zachary Taylor, like, is he a Jackson-like figure who could have, you know, been in office and been relatively popular and kept that popularity because he's, you know, a strong leader? I don't know. Like, I guess we'll never know. But it's always a question I always have. Is like, I don't know. I think the Whig Party's in much better shape, though, because you'd have a leader.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, Henry Clay does not live. When does he die? He dies in the 50s. I mean,
yeah. Was it 52 he passes away, or it's
something like that?
I don't know, something like that. Oh yeah, 52. We'll say. Leave the correct date in the comments.
He should not have been running anyhow at that stage. There's sort of a age gap.
Just so people you know, get clarity as well. So in 1850, Taylor attends a ceremony at the Washington Monument. He becomes sick and he dies July 9th, 1850. So hardly, what, seven months ish into his term. Or when was he sworn in? Would have been
I want to say it's in March at that time.
Yeah, because it's not January like it is now.
Yeah, so I mean,
you got a few months in there.
He wasn't. I don't know. It's an interesting presidency to me, in that it's hard enough to win the presidency that I think you should be remembered just for winning it, in the sense of, like, I think we should know who Zachary Taylor is.
Yeah.
My argument is always, I don't know why he always gets classified as a bad president. And this is kind of where I defend Zachary Taylor always. I don't see the rationale for saying he's a bad president or a bad leader. He's popular. He wins. I mean, my book, I looked at, he gets through the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. So he gets through a treaty with Great Britain that kind of smooths foreign relations over after the U.S.-Mexican War. He doesn't get the U.S. involved in any new wars, which is a plus because there's that threat of Cuba sort of looming. And I don't know. I don't think you can say, like, his ideas on the compromise are bad. I think he's just stubborn and he's not going to change his mind. I don't know. If you look at it, like, what's wrong if California is a free state? I mean, I think most people would sort of be like, oh, that's not bad. Like, what's wrong with that? So I don't know. I don't. When I see the little presidential rankings, I'm always like, either you should make it a separate category for those who died so quickly that they didn't really have a chance.
Yeah.
Or just, I mean, it's not like he's a Pierce or a Buchanan who you can point to and say, like, this was bad. You know, like, the worst thing you'd say about him is he died. Like, that's not really his fault. He didn't plan for that ceremony to go so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the middle of July. What are you thinking? It's going to be freezing? No, I mean, it's not going to be. You can't plan for that stuff. But
well, that's what I was. My students would always laugh, and I was like, it's terrible to laugh at. Right? It's like the man survives how many conflicts? He gets horses shot from under him. Like, he's in warfare constantly, seemingly. At the Battle of Buena Vista, like, I mean, he faces down a Mexican army that outnumbers him 3-1. Like, the guy's a legend. He becomes president, he just dies in, like, the most, I don't know, like, I don't know,
unglorious way.
Yeah, it's just like it becomes a joke. So I don't know.
If the lesson here is to go for the T-bone and not the fruit salad if you're gonna
Yeah.
run for president.
Watch out for those cherries.
Oh, well, anything else? I don't have too much more to add to that. Millard Fillmore, who who sadly, like I'm not a presidential scholar, but when I see cool names like Gabriel Slaughter, John Crittenden, and then I hear Millard Fillmore, I just think, it doesn't sound like a presidential name, you know. But anyway, yeah, he comes in.
Yeah, and I again, like when you look at that string of presidents, so many people, I mean, justifiably, Franklin Pierce is not a great president. Like he just does a lot of things. James Buchanan, like there's a lot of things as you go along that you can point to and kind of go, okay, looking back with hindsight, probably not the best legislation that you're passing there, or things that don't really make sense. You can't really say that about Taylor and Fillmore that much. Like they're not really passing things that you look back at a decade later and you're like, okay, that was just dumb.
Yeah.
Most of what they do is pretty steady. It's pretty unifying. I mean, both men are sort of firm nationalists. They don't want to see the Union break up in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, I would argue that I think Taylor, if he had been president, I mean, he's going to take a much stronger stand than a James Buchanan does. So I do think that's sort of kind of the interesting dynamic. But then again, that's the problem of history. It's like certain things happen, certain things don't.
The cause and effect.
Yeah, I would say
I agree with you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if someone is in Kentucky, I always think it's just interesting to, I don't know. I mean, we don't really celebrate Taylor in any way, but I mean, he's buried here, and it's still, I mean, even though no one really looks back at the Mexican-American War and goes like, "Oh man, that was an amazing war." Like in his day, he was at that sort of, I don't know, that legendary status, and it went away really quickly because you had the Civil War, and quickly you have like a new generation. But I don't know. I always just think that like Taylor does sort of deserve still to be remembered at the least.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those rankings always come out and always get me mad because I'm always like, no, like what? You can't. Even William Henry Harrison, like I think it's just unfair. Like, how do you put him in the bottom rank? Like, he died. He can't. Garfield, he got shot.
Is it fair to say there's a point of no return? Like I agree with you that Buchanan was a horrible president, but some people would argue that at that point the nation has already slidden so far, dissolution is inevitable. Is Taylor the last chance for a resolution without violence?
Yeah, I think that's a toughie. Because again, I don't know. Even with Buchanan, I always get in this debate with people. It's like, even if Buchanan takes a stronger stand, what are we talking about? Like, you're just moving the Civil War up. You know what I mean? Like, you just be moving the timeline up. And then that's a weird situation. Like, it's a weird situation anyhow, but then you're basically going, here's a war, Lincoln. like deal with it. Like, we've never had that situation. Yeah, like in U.S. history where, a president steps away. And the next president in the midst of a war. So that would be, I don't want to say I sympathize with Buchanan, but I do think sometimes, people are limited in what they can do. So even when Hamilton wrote that book on Taylor and said, oh, maybe, if he had been president, things would have started earlier. But does that just mean the Civil War just gets moved up a decade? Like, I don't know. Like, is that?
Well, we talk about Taylor, in his War of 1812 connection. So if you use that as a parallel, you've got Jefferson, and he's got all these embargoes and this hard line that we've taken against the British. And so when Madison comes into office, you've got a sagging economy. You've got a whole generation of people who are really upset with the British. And whether you want the War of 1812 or not, you're sort of drug into it. And so Madison puts it off kind of as long as he can before it happens. And I like you wonder, at what point is the war inevitable? And if you don't offer some concession, you simply move it up. Taylor, as you said, strong personality. Maybe he's the last chance for peace. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's a tricky thing as well is, okay, even if you were, Taylor would have been older at that point in time, would you really be, an effective commander-in-chief in the sense of whatever people have pointed to, like Lincoln's flaws, he still allows his generals to kind of do their own thing, which is kind of the tricky thing. What if you have a commander-in-chief who was a general? Like, I mean, I think that's kind of the dynamics that are different, because then, does he have a strategy that he wants to see carried out? I don't know. I mean,
and then he tries to force it down. I mean, that could be
right.
Then be bad. It could be a negative.
Or is there just sort of a waiting? You know what I mean? No one's gonna. It's not like Lincoln, where the fear is that Lincoln's going to abolish slavery or something like that. You're not going to fear that with Taylor, because I mean, he has slaves. So that's kind of the other dynamic, is you want to have that same fear. You can't legitimately call like Clay or Taylor an abolitionist. I mean, people do, but that's yeah. I mean, that's like where Abraham Lincoln, like, people are I think truly fearful in certain places that you elect a Republican, it's going to be a northern government run by a northerner who's going to just crack down.
Well, and then too, on the thought that so Taylor's the commander-in-chief. He's got all this war experience. He gets reelected, let's say. So then we're just sitting there waiting. He can't get elected again, or he could, but he's getting old. So let's just wait him out, and then it falls into chaos or whatever.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's a tricky thing. Is even getting back to sort of the the inability of people to know what will happen at the time. With Taylor, it's just tricky, because it's kind of like, I think he'd have taken a hard line, but does that mean other people just back down? I don't know. Like an Andrew Jackson, more of a situation where it's kind of like, yeah, we're not going to test this guy.
Yeah.
Because he actually might come down and shoot us. But yeah, I don't know. I guess that's my thing. Is I appreciated you all having me on this discussion. Just because I mean, even as an outsider, I just find Taylor a fascinating person. And I think at least his military career does deserve to be remembered. And I don't think you have to say that he's the greatest military leader ever, just to say that he really does have an impact on U.S. history. And that, I mean, we might not look at Buena Vista or some of these other battles as being as significant today, but I think they sort of are in their own way.
Yeah.
In how they change U.S. history. I mean, I think sometimes we forget about those wars as well. I'm a Mexican War guy, so that's like what I do. So I'm sure, Dave, with you in the War of 1812, it's kind of like, sometimes they get overlooked with certain conflicts. Like, this is important too, guys. This matters.
And Taylor had a big impact on Manifest Destiny, right?
Yeah, and that was my argument. That's how I got to him. I was like, oh, this guy's interesting. He doesn't agree with like a lot of what's happening. He's a Southerner, sort of. So how does that sort of play out? So I don't know. I just find him interesting. And then the conspiracies that he was poisoned and all that good stuff. Like,
that's a layer of mystery.
Yeah. Well, you guys got anything else? I think we've covered this quite well. Anything else you want to add before we roll off?
No. I've been telling my wife I want to write an article about Zachary Taylor's horse. He has a very famous horse, Old Whitey. There's a story in there. When he gets to the White House, they actually ship Old Whitey. I don't know where Old Whitey is, but they send him all the way to the White House.
Oh, wow.
As it's like horse, and it's one of the first. I don't want to say presidential pets, but it's one of the earliest stories of like a president who has a famous war horse who goes out, and then like it's just, I don't know. I think it's an interesting tale in that.
Well, that's a good horse name. That is a good horse name.
Old Whitey.
I didn't know either. That's kind of neat.
Yeah. So if you see him in a lot of pictures,
his horse is white. It's white. I'm just thinking about that. Yeah, all those pictures. He has a white horse. Huh.
Yeah. So that's Old Whitey.
That's Old Whitey.
If you go to the Old State Capitol is the one I'm thinking of. They have a portrait of Taylor, and he's on Old Whitey. And if a lot of the I don't know, the sort of the propaganda or the sort of campaign songs and all these sort of things that emerge, they always talk about Old Whitey as sort of like his horse, and he went through battle and rough and ready and old. So I don't know. I think there's a story in there somehow. I don't know why, but
that is interesting. Anything else, David?
No, I could go on forever. It's fascinating stuff, but I think we've covered it.
Yeah. Daniel, we thank you a bunch for coming on and talking with us about it. Again, the invitation stands. When you write that article about old Whitey, you can come on and tell us more. But we'll have you on again, hopefully soon, and keep on doing what you're doing and supporting the history, especially the history in Kentucky. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.